The transport ship descended through clouds of purple gas and pressed her face against the small window to watch. Below her, the Galactic Coalition Military Academy spread across the surface of Prime like a city made of light. Towers of white metal reached toward the sky. Landing platforms floated in the air without any visible support. Ships from 100 different worlds moved in careful patterns above the campus. Had dreamed of this place since she was 12 years old. Now she was here, and her heart was beating so fast she could feel it in her throat. She was one of only 3 humans admitted to the academy that year. Humanity had only been part of galactic civilization for 100 years. To the elder species, humans were still children. New, unproven. Most of them thought humans belonged on their little blue planet, not in the halls where warriors had trained for thousands of years. Did not care what they thought. She had worked too hard to be here. She had passed every test. She had earned her place. The transport landed with a soft hum, picked up her single bag and walked down the ramp into the light of an alien sun. The air smelled like metal and flowers she could not name. Other cadets were already gathering on the platform. She saw with their scaled skin and sharp claws. She saw massive creatures with 4 arms and faces like carved stone. She saw, thin and pale, their eyes completely black. She saw species she had only read about in books. And they all looked at her. Some looked curious. Most looked amused. A few looked annoyed, as if her presence was an insult they had not expected. Kept her back straight and walked toward the main building. She would not let them see her fear. On her chest, pinned to her uniform, she wore a small cloth patch. It was old. The fabric was thin and soft from age. The colors had faded from bright blue to something closer to gray. The design was simple, a circle containing a white star surrounded by a wreath of leaves. It looked nothing like the insignias worn by the other cadets. The war holographic emblems that shifted and glowed with their family histories. They had metal badges carved with symbols that changed based on their achievements. Even the cadets from the youngest species wore something that looked modern and clean. This patch looked like it belonged in a museum or a garbage bin. She did not care. Her grandmother had given it to her before she died. Her grandmother had received it from her mother, who had received it from hers. 5 generations of women had kept this patch safe, would not be the one to leave it behind. The orientation ceremony was held in a great hall with a ceiling so high it disappeared into shadow. Thousands of cadets sat in rows of floating seats. Instructors stood on a raised platform at the front, their uniforms covered in medals and honors. Found a seat near the middle. She tried to make herself small to avoid attention. It did not work. A tall sat down next to her. His scales were deep green and his eyes were golden. His uniform was perfect, without a single wrinkle. The holographic emblem on his chest showed a family crest that recognized from her studies. House. One of the oldest noble families in the Empire. His ancestors had been generals when humans were still learning to make fire. He looked at her, then he looked at her patch, then he laughed. It was not a quiet laugh. It was loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. Other cadets turned to look. More laughter followed. "What is that?" asked. His voice was smooth and cruel. "Did you skin an animal and pin it to your chest? Is this how humans display their achievements, with scraps of cloth?" Felt her face grow hot. She wanted to respond. She wanted to explain. But her grandmother's words came back to her, the same words that had been passed down through her family for 300 years. Wear it when you go to war. Never explain it to those who laugh. So she said nothing. She simply touched the patch once, a small gesture of comfort, and turned to face the front of the hall. Was not finished. "I have heard that humans are primitive," he said, loud enough for the whole section to hear. "But I did not know they were this primitive. Tell me, human, do you also carry a pointed stick for a weapon? Do you paint your face with mud before battle?" More laughter kept her eyes forward. Her hands were shaking, but she held them still in her lap. The ceremony began before could say anything more. The Academy's commander, an ancient whose body was more machine than flesh, gave a long speech about honor and duty and the glory of service. Tried to listen, but she could feel eyes on her the whole time. She could feel the amusement radiating from the cadets around her. She was a joke to them, a curiosity, a primitive creature who had somehow wandered into a place she did not belong. But high above the hall, in an observation gallery hidden behind one-way glass, someone else was watching. Senior Instructor was old, even by standards. He had served in wars that most cadets had never heard of. He had trained warriors from 47 different species. He had seen courage and cowardice in every form they could take. Very little surprised him anymore. But when his eyes found the human girl with the faded patch on her chest, he stopped breathing. He leaned forward. He activated the zoom function on his optical implant. He studied the insignia with the intensity of a man who had just seen a ghost. The design was unmistakable. The blue circle, the white star, the laurel wreath. He had seen it before, long ago, in records that were supposed to be destroyed, in archives that officially did not exist. Below, the noble was still making jokes. The human girl was still silent, still enduring. The other cadets were still laughing. Did not laugh. He watched the girl touch her patch again, that same small gesture, and he felt something he had not felt in a very long time. His hands were trembling. He turned away from the window and walked to his private terminal. He entered codes that only 12 beings in the entire galaxy knew. He accessed files that had been sealed for 3 centuries. And there, in the darkness of his office, the old warrior began to read about a war that the galaxy had tried very hard to forget. The first weeks at the Academy were hard. Woke before dawn every day. She trained until her muscles screamed. She studied until her eyes burned. She learned to use weapons that humans had never touched before. She learned tactics that had been developed over thousands of years by species far older than her own. She was not the best cadet. She was not even close. They had neural implants that let them process information 10 times faster than any human brain. In tactical simulations, they could see patterns that could not even imagine. The collective representatives shared thoughts with each other instantly, moving as one mind in many bodies. They were stronger than anything had ever faced. They had been bred for war for 11,000 years. Was just human. She was stronger than the instructors expected, faster than they predicted, more stubborn than they thought possible. But she was still just human. She made mistakes. She lost simulations. She struggled with technology that other cadets used as easily as breathing. And through it all, watched. He waited. He found new ways to remind her that she did not belong. He discovered that her patch was not a copy. It was not a reproduction made to look old. It was actually from Earth, actually ancient. Fiberdating confirmed the material was over 300 years old. The cloth had been made on a planet that most cadets had never even visited. This became his favorite joke. "The human wears garbage," he would say to anyone who would listen. "She pins trash to her uniform and calls it an honor. Her people have been in space for 1 century, and this is the best they can do. A piece of dirty cloth." Other cadets began to avoid. Nobody wanted to be associated with the primitive girl and her strange insignia. Nobody wanted to risk their social standing by being seen as her friend. Ate alone, she trained alone, she studied alone. She did not remove the patch. Some nights when everyone else was asleep, she would sit in her small room and hold the patch in her hands. The fabric was so thin she could almost see through it. The stitching was done by hand, not by machine. Someone had made this with their own fingers 300 years ago on a planet that was now just one world among thousands. Her grandmother had told her the story, not all of it because not all of it had survived, but enough. This patch belonged to, she was a soldier. She served in something called the Last Stand Coalition. She did not come home from the war. That was all anyone knew. The records had been lost. The details had faded with time. Was just a name now, a photograph in an old album, a story with no ending. But the patch remained, and the instruction remained. Wear it when you go to war. Never explain it to those who laugh. Did not understand why. She did not know what was so special about this piece of cloth, but she trusted her grandmother, and her grandmother had trusted her mother, and so on back through the generations. Somewhere at the beginning of that chain, there was a reason. Somewhere this patch meant something. One evening, after a particularly brutal training session, received a message on her personal terminal. It was from Senior Instructor. He wanted to see her in his private study. This was unusual. Instructors did not normally summon individual cadets. When they did, it usually meant trouble. Cleaned herself up and walked across campus to the instructor's building. The corridors were quiet. Most cadets were eating dinner or resting. She found his office at the end of a long hallway and pressed the door chime. The door opened. The room inside was full of weapons. They hung on every wall, sat on every shelf, filled every corner. Swords and guns and devices that could not even name. Some were ancient. Some were modern. All of them looked like they had been used in actual combat. Stood at the far end of the room, his back to her. He was looking at a holographic display that floated in the air before him. The images were moving too fast for to follow. "Close the door," he said without turning around. Did as she was told. She stood at attention and waited. Did not speak for a long time. The holographic display continued to flicker with images and data. Saw star maps, fleet formations, casualty reports. She saw things that looked like battle recordings. She saw species she did not recognize. Finally, turned off the display. The room fell dark except for the soft glow of emergency lighting. He turned to face her. His face was impossible to read. They did not show emotion the way humans did, but there was something in his posture, something in the way he held his forearms that made stomach tighten. "Where did you get that insignia?" he asked. His voice was quiet. Had expected anger. She had expected criticism. She had not expected this question. "It belonged to my ancestor," she said. "My great-great-great-grandmother, Sergeant Major. It has been passed down through my family." "And what do you know about her service?" Hesitated. "Very little. The records were lost. I know she was part of something called the Last Stand Coalition. I know she died in the war, that is all." Was silent again. He walked slowly toward her, his heavy feet making no sound on the floor. When he was close enough to touch her, he stopped, his eyes fixed on the patch. "Do you know what your ancestor did?" he asked. "No, sir." "Do you know what the Last Stand Coalition was?" "I assumed it was a minor conflict on Earth, something local." Made a sound. It might have been a laugh. It might have been something else. "There has only been one conflict in galactic history called a last stand," he said. "And it was not minor, it was not local, and it was not on Earth." He turned away from her and walked back toward his display. "What I am about to show you," he said, "does not officially exist. The archives have been sealed for 300 years. The elder species agreed to bury this memory. What you are about to learn will change everything you think you know." He activated the display again. This time, the images moved slowly enough for her to see. And what she saw stopped her heart. The holographic display filled the room with light. Saw a galaxy, not her galaxy, something else, something far away. The stars were arranged differently. The colors were wrong. And as she watched, those stars began to go dark. One by one, solar systems disappeared. Planets stopped sending signals. Entire civilizations winked out of existence like candles being blown out by wind. "This is what we call the Hollow," said. His voice was flat, empty. "It came from outside our galaxy, from the space between spaces. We do not know what it truly was, we only know what it did." The display shifted. saw something that her brain refused to accept, a shape that was not quite a shape, a darkness that moved like a living thing. Ships the size of moons, built from materials that seemed to eat the light around them. The Hollow did not conquer, continued. It did not enslave, it did not negotiate, it consumed. Every civilization it touched was harvested, every species was unmade, every world was left as nothing but dust. 3 galaxies, whispered. She had read the word in the files he was showing her. It destroyed 3 galaxies. Consumed, corrected her. Destroyed suggests there was something left. There was nothing, not even ruins. The Hollow erased everything it touched from existence. The display changed again. Now saw her own galaxy, the Milky Way, the stars she had grown up watching from her bedroom window on Earth. 312 years ago, the Hollow arrived here. His voice was steady, but could hear something underneath it, something that sounded almost like pain. The great powers of the galaxy united against it. The Empire, the Dominion, the Ascendancy. 12 elder species with combined military experience spanning millions of years. We built the largest fleet in galactic history. We gathered every weapon, every ship, every soldier we had. The display showed the combined armada, thousands of dreadnoughts, millions of smaller vessels, a force so large it blocked out the light of nearby stars. We thought we could win, said. We were wrong. The next images were harder to watch. Ship after ship, torn apart. Fleets that had taken centuries to build, destroyed in hours. The Hollow moved through the combined forces of the elder species like a knife through water. We lasted 18 months, said. 18 months of fighting, 18 months of dying, and then came. The display showed a gap between star systems, a narrow passage that was the only route to the core of the galaxy, the last defensive position. This is where we made our final stand. This is where we lost. Watched as the last great battle played out before her eyes. She saw the elder species fighting with everything they had. She saw their ships burning. She saw their lines breaking. She saw the moment when the commanders realized there was no hope. The retreat order was given, said. The elder species began to pull back. We told ourselves we were preparing cultural preservation measures, a polite way of saying we were going to hide and hope the Hollow would overlook us. His voice grew quiet. We were running away, all of us, every species that had called themselves great for thousands of years. We were running. The display shifted one more time, and now saw something different. Ships, small ships, crude ships, vessels that looked like they had been built by children compared to the elegant dreadnoughts of the elder species. Human ships. Humanity had only possessed faster-than-light travel for 40 years, said. Your species was barely known. You had no dreadnoughts, no planetary shields, no experience with galactic warfare. You were not even supposed to be there. Leaned closer to the display. She saw the human fleet assembling. She saw troop transports loading. She saw soldiers in simple uniforms gathering on launch platforms. But you came anyway, said. In 3 weeks, humanity assembled a volunteer force of 847,000 soldiers, men and women from every nation on Earth. They were transported to the front on borrowed ships because you did not have enough of your own. Felt tears forming in her eyes. She did not try to stop them. They called themselves the Last Stand Coalition, said, and when the retreat order was given, they refused to obey. The display showed the human ships moving forward, not back, forward, into the darkness, into the Hollow. Your people had no way to destroy Hollow vessels, said. Your weapons were too weak. Your technology was too primitive, so they boarded them. They fought through corridors that drove other species insane. They planted explosives in reactor cores. When the explosives failed, they detonated their ships manually. Watched as human soldiers charged into impossible darkness. She watched them die by the hundreds, by the thousands, by the tens of thousands. They did not stop. The Hollow used psychic weapons, said. Every being that faced it directly felt its full mental weight. The elder species had developed psychological defenses over thousands of years. We could resist it long enough to function. But humans had no such defenses. Every human soldier who engaged the Hollow experienced the full horror of its presence. Their minds were being torn apart from the moment they entered combat. His voice cracked. They fought anyway. Thought of her ancestor, a sergeant major, a leader, a woman who had known she was going to die and had gone anyway. The humans held the gap for 11 days, said. 11 days of constant combat, 11 days of dying. They lost 97% of their forces, but they did not retreat. They did not surrender. They did not stop. Why? Asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. Turned off the display. The room fell dark. Because that is what humans do, he said. You do not know when to stop. You do not understand when something is impossible. You see death coming and you attack it. He walked to his desk and sat down heavily. For the first time he looked old, truly old, like a being who had carried a weight for 300 years and was finally allowing himself to feel it. The Hollow, he said. For the first time in its existence, it encountered something it did not understand. A species that was losing, knew it was losing, had no hope of survival and attacked harder. It did not know how to process this. So it paused. It retreated to recalculate. How long? 6 years. Long enough for the elder species to develop the resonance weapon that finally ended the threat. Stared at him. You won because of us, she said, because we bought you time. Nodded slowly. Every species in this galaxy exists because 847,000 humans refused to run. He looked at her insignia, the faded patch, the simple design. That insignia was worn by every human soldier in the Last Stand Coalition, he said. They designed it themselves in the 3 weeks before they left Earth. There are no ranks on it, no nation markers, just a symbol. What does it mean? Asked. Met her eyes. It means we hold the line. Could not speak. The words would not come. She sat in Instructor's dark office and felt the weight of 300 years pressing down on her chest. 847,000. That was not just a number. That was 847,000 mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, brothers and sisters and friends, people who had said goodbye to everyone they loved, knowing they would never come back. And her ancestor had been one of them. Show me more, said finally. Her voice was steady but her hands were shaking. Show me what happened to her, too. Studied her for a long moment. Then he activated the display again. Your great-great-great-grandmother was a sergeant major in the Earth Defense Force, he said. She was 43 years old when she volunteered. She had 2 children at home, a husband, a life. She left all of it. The display showed a personnel file. Saw a photograph of a woman with dark skin and kind eyes. She looked like's grandmother. She looked like. Sergeant Major was assigned to the boarding corps, continued. These were the soldiers who went inside the hollow vessels. It was considered the most dangerous assignment possible. The survival rate was less than 3%. The display shifted to show tactical readouts. Saw schematics of hollow ships. They were wrong, twisted. The corridors did not follow normal geometry. The angles did not make sense to human eyes. The hollow did not just attack bodies, said. It attacked minds. Walking through its vessels was like walking through a nightmare made solid. Soldiers reported seeing things that could not exist, hearing voices of people who had been dead for years, feeling their sanity being pulled apart like wet paper. How did anyone survive long enough to fight? Most did not. The elder species sent only their most mentally hardened warriors, those who had trained for decades to resist psychological attack. Even then, the failure rate was enormous. But humans had no such training, no psychological armor, no defense at all. His voice grew quiet. Your people went in anyway. They went insane and they kept fighting. They felt their minds breaking and they kept moving forward. We have studied the records for 300 years, and we still do not fully understand how this was possible. The display showed combat footage. Watched human soldiers advancing through corridors of living darkness. She saw them firing weapons that barely seemed to damage their enemies. She saw them falling, one after another, and she saw the one still standing stepping over the bodies to continue forward. Nobody ran, nobody surrendered, nobody stopped. On the 11th day of the battle, said, Sergeant Major led a boarding action against the Hollow Command Nexus. This was the central coordination node for the entire Hollow presence in our galaxy. If it could be destroyed, the Hollow would lose its ability to function as a unified force. The display showed leading 32 soldiers into a ship that looked like it had been carved from frozen screams. Wanted to look away. She forced herself to watch. The fighting was beyond anything in our records, said. Your ancestor and her unit fought for 16 hours straight. They had no sleep, no reinforcements, no hope of rescue. The Hollow threw everything it had at them. Saw the numbers changing on the display. 32 became 25, 25 became 17, 17 became 8, 8 became 3. 3 soldiers reached the central processing node, said. Sergeant Major was one of them. They had enough explosives to destroy it, but the detonation system was damaged. The only way to set off the charges was manually. Already knew how this story ended. She had known since she was a child, holding a faded patch and listening to her grandmother tell stories with no endings. But hearing it confirmed was different. Hearing it made it real. Your ancestor armed the explosives herself, said. The last recorded transmission from her unit was 7 words. He played the audio. Through 300 years of static and decay, heard a woman's voice. Calm, tired, unafraid. We hold the line. Detonation in 10. Then silence. Felt tears running down her face. She did not wipe them away. The command nexus was destroyed, said. Without it, the Hollow lost coordination. Its attacks became random, unorganized. This was the beginning of its confusion, the moment it first began to doubt. He turned off the display. The room was dark again. The Hollow had consumed 3 galaxies, he said. It had destroyed civilizations that were old when the universe was young. It had never been stopped. It had never even been slowed. And then your people walked into its heart with primitive weapons and impossible courage, and they made it bleed. He looked at Insignia, the patch that had pinned to her own uniform 300 years ago. The Hollow did not understand humans, said. It processed threat assessments based on technology and numbers and resources. By every measurement, humanity should have been nothing, a minor speed bump, an insect to be crushed without thought. But we were not. No, you were not. You were the one species in 3 galaxies that did not calculate its odds of survival before deciding whether to fight. You were the one species that treated certain death as a tactical inconvenience rather than a reason to retreat. Stood and walked to a cabinet at the far end of the room. He opened it and removed something small. When he returned, saw that it was a piece of metal, old, damaged, scorched by fire and warped by forces she could not imagine. This was recovered from the wreckage of the command nexus, he said. It is a fragment of a human weapon, a rifle, we think. We kept it as a reminder. He placed it in his hands. The elder species spent 6 years developing the resonance weapon that finally destroyed the Hollow, he said. We celebrated ourselves as the saviors of the galaxy. We wrote histories that praised our genius and our courage. We gave ourselves medals and monuments and songs. His voice became hard. And we buried the truth. We sealed the records. We agreed never to speak of what really happened, because the truth was too shameful. Why asked, why hide it? Was silent for a long moment. Because we ran, he said finally. The great powers of the galaxy, the species that called themselves elder, the civilizations that had existed for millions of years. When the moment came, we ran, and we were saved by a species that had been in space for 40 years. Children, primitives, insects. He looked at her with eyes that held 300 years of guilt. We could not accept that we owed our existence to you. We could not admit that everything we believed about ourselves was wrong. So we erased the truth and told ourselves a lie. Looked at the scorched metal in her hands. Then she looked at the patch on her chest. They knew, she said quietly. My ancestors, they knew the truth would be buried. That is why they passed down the insignia with that instruction. Wear it when you go to war. Never explain it to those who laugh. Because the explanation would not be believed, said, and because the insignia itself was enough. Everyone who mattered would recognize it. Everyone who knew the real history would understand what it meant. Stood, her legs were unsteady, but her voice was not. Why are you telling me this now? Why me? Looked at her for a long time before answering. Because I am tired of the lie, he said, and because it is time for the galaxy to remember what humans did for us, what they gave up so that we could survive. He walked to the door and opened it. Go and rest, he said. Tomorrow everything changes. Did not sleep that night. She lay in her small room and stared at the ceiling and thought about 847,000 people who had walked into death so that strangers could live. She thought about a woman she had never met, a woman who had been dead for 3 centuries, a woman who had left her children behind and traveled across the galaxy to die in a ship made of nightmares. She thought about the patch on her chest, just cloth and thread, just colors and shapes, but it carried the weight of everything that had been sacrificed. When morning came, put on her uniform. She pinned the insignia in its usual place. She walked to the training halls as she did every day. But today was different. Instead of combat drills, the cadets were summoned to the main lecture hall. Thousands of them filled the floating seats, found her usual place near the middle, sat nearby, already whispering jokes to his friends. Instructor stood at the front of the hall. He looked different today. His posture was, his eyes were harder. He looked like a soldier preparing for battle. Today's lesson is not in your curriculum, he said. His voice carried across the silent hall. Today, I will teach you about a war that your governments have tried very hard to forget. The holographic displays activated. The cadets saw what had seen the night before. The hollow, the 3 galaxies it had consumed, the combined fleet of the elder species. And the defeat at. Watched the faces of the cadets around her. She saw confusion, disbelief, horror. The cadets looked at their holographic emblems with new uncertainty. The cadets shifted uncomfortably in their seats. The cadets processed the information with blank eyes that hid whatever they were feeling. Was not laughing anymore. The great powers of the galaxy united against the hollow, said, and we lost. When the final line broke, we retreated. We ran. He let the words hang in the air. But one species did not run. The display changed. Now the cadets saw the human fleet, the small ships, the crude technology, the soldiers in simple uniforms. Humanity had been in space for 40 years, said. They had no experience with galactic war. They had no weapons that could truly hurt the hollow. They had no chance of survival. They volunteered anyway, 847,000 of them, and when we gave the order to retreat, they refused. The battle played out before the assembled cadets. They watched human soldiers boarding hollow vessels. They watched them dying by the thousands. They watched them refusing to stop, refusing to surrender, refusing to retreat. Nobody spoke, nobody moved. The hall was silent except for his voice. Humans held the gap for 11 days, he said. They lost 97% of their forces. They faced horrors that would have broken any other species, and they kept fighting. He paused the display on an image that recognized the command nexus, the ship where had died. A human sergeant major led the final assault on the hollow command node, said. She and her unit fought for 16 hours. 32 soldiers entered that ship. 3 reached the target. None survived. He played the audio recording. 7 words spoken by a woman who knew she was about to die. We hold the line. Detonation in 10. The sound of that voice filled the hall. Saw cadets lowering their heads. She saw warriors with tears on their stone faces. She saw nobles clutching their ceremonial emblems with trembling claws. The hollow, after the destruction of the command nexus, said. It could not understand what humans had done. It had never encountered a species that fought harder when defeat was certain. It paused to recalculate. That pause lasted 6 years, long enough for us to develop the weapon that finally destroyed it. He turned off the display. The hall was dark. Every species in this room exists because humans refuse to run, he said. Every world you call home, every family you love, every future you hope to see. All of it exists because of what happened at. He walked down from the platform. His footsteps echoed in the silence. He walked past rows of cadets from dozens of species. He walked until he stood in front of. The entire hall watched. Looked at her insignia, the faded patch, the simple design that had been mocked by everyone who saw it. Then slowly, the old warrior performed a gesture that did not recognize. He placed all 4 of his arms against his chest and bowed his head until it almost touched the ground. Gasps filled the hall. Someone cried out in shock. Several cadets stood involuntarily, their faces pale with disbelief. Did not understand, but she could feel the weight of the moment. Whatever was doing, it meant something important. The someone whispered behind her, he is performing the. Learned later what that meant. There was the acknowledgement of debt. It had not been performed by an instructor in over 2,000 years. It was a public declaration that the one performing it owed their existence to the one receiving it. Held the position for a long moment. Then he straightened and faced the assembled cadets. This insignia, he said, pointing to his patch, was worn by every human soldier in the Last Stand coalition. It is the symbol of the greatest sacrifice in galactic history. From this day forward, any cadet who mocks it will be expelled from this academy. Not for insult, for ignorance. His voice hardened. We do not train soldiers who do not know who saved them. The hall was silent, felt thousands of eyes on her. She felt the weight of their stares, their shame, their sudden understanding. Then stood. The noble walked down from his seat. His face was strange. Had never seen that expression on him before. It took her a moment to recognize it. Humility. He crossed the distance between them and dropped to one knee. His head bowed. His claws touched the floor. I did not know, he said quietly. I mocked what I did not understand. I insulted the memory of heroes. I asked forgiveness. Looked at him. This was the person who had made her life miserable for weeks, the person who had called her primitive, the person who had laughed at her and encouraged others to do the same. She thought about what her ancestor had died for. Not revenge, not glory, not recognition, just survival. The survival of people she would never meet from species she had never seen. Touched the patch on her chest, that same small gesture she had made 1,000 times before. Now she understood why. You were not supposed to know, she said. Her voice was soft, but it carried across the silent hall. You were supposed to live. She reached down and offered her hand. He looked up at her with eyes that held 300 years of debt finally acknowledged. He took her hand, and she helped him rise. All around the hall, cadets from elder species watched in silence. They saw a human show them something they had forgotten was possible, something their ancestors had been too ashamed to remember. Grace. Years later, when became the first human admiral in Galactic Coalition history, she was offered any insignia in the Coalition's catalog. Quantum-threaded emblems, holographic displays, symbols of power that would be recognized across 1,000 worlds. She declined. On her chest, she wore a faded cloth patch, a simple blue circle containing a white star and a laurel wreath. The fabric was thin and soft from age. The colors had faded from bright blue to something closer to gray. No one laughed. No one had laughed in a very long time. And in the archives of the Galactic Coalition, in a file that was no longer classified, there was a simple entry that every cadet learned on their first day at the Academy. 847,000 humans volunteered to die so that the galaxy could live. We remember them. We honor them. We carry the debt that can never be repaid. Below the entry was a symbol, a blue circle, a white star, a laurel wreath. And below the symbol were 3 words. We hold the line.